Yeah, thank you for having me and thank you everyone for coming. Appreciate it. Um, so I'll start off by reading a chapter. I think I'm going to read the whole chapter if that's okay. Yeah, I have time for that. Um, I'll just take this off for the reading and then I'll put it back on. I tried doing a reading with my mask on and I started sweating a lot. So if you have your book with you, you can read along. Like we're in church, I always feel like. Um, and hello to anyone who's online right now. Thank you for tuning in. So I'm going to read Stealing Sheetrock, which is on page 213. And then also be thinking about questions you might have for me, because we'll do that afterwards. And if I don't get any questions, I'll be sad. All right. Here we go. Stealing Sheetrock. Have you ever heard of a book called Praying for Sheetrock? I asked my mother on my pink Motorola Razr while sitting in my residence hall's computer lab. I'd been assigned the 1991 nonfiction book by Melissa Fay Green in my Georgia history class at the University of Georgia. A few pages into my hardback copy, I realized it was set in McIntosh County. I doubted the majority of my classmates, mostly white kids from Atlanta's suburbs, knew where to locate it on a map. Tucked in a southeastern pocket of Georgia alongside the Atlantic. I was born and raised in Glenn County, directly south of McIntosh, where my mother and her mother were raised. On Sunday mornings, my siblings and I would pile into Mama's Honda Accord, dressed in our finest garb, as she drove us 20 miles north on Highway 17 to her family's religious home, the Baptist Church in a McIntosh community, Meridian. After we congregated at my great aunt and her family's home down the street from church, where we would eat heaps of food. Meridian made where we lived, the small city of Brunswick, look like a bustling metropolis. I felt bored driving past the endless creeks, rivers, marshes, pine and live oak trees, churches, and rickety trailers of McIntosh. I dreamed of one day living in a big city like Atlanta or New York. I never anticipated having my roots thrust into my face by a white history teaching assistant. The one with the people on the highway picking up shoes, Mama questioned in response to my query. That was the one. She was referring to the book's prologue, in which Green describes the aftermath of two trucks crashing on Highway 17 in Yolonia, an all-Black hamlet 9 miles north of Meridian, in June 1971. With McIntosh County Sheriff Tom Popple presiding over the scene, Yolonia residents helped themselves to fancy, brand new leather shoes, spilled out onto the highway by one of the trucks, greeting a silent Popple while doing so. Green cast Popple as villain of the story. The sheriff's appearance didn't necessarily project power. A white-haired, 5'9", 150-pound frame, clad in the fashion of the day. Think bell-bottom slacks and white loafers. But his commanding aura was legendary. The author writes that the sheriff represented the last of the good old boy system. White male political bosses who govern their municipalities with an iron fist through corrupt behavior. Illegal gambling, prostitution, and speed traps were all permissible on his watch, as long as he got a cut of the loot. Back then, every Black person in McIntosh was registered to vote, and they always voted for Popple, or else. According to Green, Black folks in McIntosh respected him because he knew them all by name and would look out for them, like keeping his mouth shut as they indulged in spilled goods on the highway, a frequent occurrence. She writes that they revered the high sheriff, despite his role in keeping them so poor. One of them praised for sheetrock to finish building her home. Popple made sure they didn't have access to good jobs or housing. Black and white citizens alike feared this dictator who had the last say on all local affairs. But white folks knew they would be punished less severely than their Negro counterparts for their trespasses. Well, you can tell your professor that mother used to cook for the sheriff, Mama said as we chatted about the book. Mother is what we called my maternal great-grandmother who died when I was in 8th grade. Before asking Mama about praying for sheetrock, I'd never even thought about what Mother did for a living. She was retired by the time I came around in 1987. Turns out, in addition to operating a beauty salon out of her home in Darien, McIntosh's county seat, Mother cooked for the notorious Sheriff Popple. I can picture Mother, a stout, blue-black lady who wore a wig, confidently clanging pots around a humid kitchen to prepare Popple's food. The image is jarring since I rarely even saw her in the vicinity of a white man. Mother sat at the head of our dinner table and at the front of our church. She was a proud woman, the leader of our family, and a leader at church. I hope she had held her head high as she served that skinny white bigot, even if she feared his power. Mama says Mother would yell at my uncle for fighting white kids who taunted them because she was afraid the Ku Klux Klan would burn down their home. Perhaps Popple helped instill that fear in her. Green portrays the Black community of McIntosh as docile, gullible, and unworldly. At the time of the shoe truck in 1971, the Black community of McIntosh County was blind and deaf to issues of civil equality, equal employment, and local corruption, she writes in her prologue. During my recent reread, I couldn't help but question Green's reliability as narrator of this story. I question whether a white Jewish woman raised in Ohio who stumbled across McIntosh while working with the Georgia Legal Services Program can shed her inherent biases when interviewing Southern Black folks. I read an article online where she says her interview subjects perceived her as a fellow outsider, and she regarded them as friends. I would never depict a friend as helpless as Green paints her subjects to be. The author frames the election of Thurnell Alston, a Black retired Boilermaker and former Union steward, to the McIntosh County Commission in the 1970s as the catalyst that finally ushers in the civil rights movement. She characterizes Alston as an unlikely leader because of his stuttering, high-pitched voice. There is no mention of Tunis Campbell, a Black man originally from the Northeast who held several leadership positions in McIntosh and the state of Georgia in the 1860s. In March 1865, Campbell was appointed by the Freedmen's Bureau to help resettle land on 5 of Georgia's sea islands. He bought 1,250 acres of land in McIntosh and established a settlement of Black landowners called Belleville. He served as state senator, president of the state Republican Party, and delegate to the state constitutional convention. As retribution for executing the aims of Reconstruction, Campbell was terrorized by the KKK. His family lived in fear, like my great-grandmother did a century later. Still, local Black people didn't take the terror sitting down. 300 of them once defended Campbell's home from the KKK. In a similar turn in 1899, hundreds of Darien's Black residents guarded the city jail with arms to stop a white lynch mob from getting to Henry Delaval, a Black man falsely accused of raping a white woman. Where are these acts of Black rebellion in Green's narrative? In a review essay of Praying for Sheetrock, historian James E. Goodman expresses confusion over Green's omission of Black people's post-emancipation struggle in McIntosh. That is so obvious an oversight that I repeatedly found myself paging backwards to see if there were sentences or paragraphs I missed. I can't help but wonder if Green commits historical erasure to serve her sleepy and subservient depiction of my ancestors. Green waxes poetically about McIntosh's Scottish roots, but rushes through a description of the Gullah language as a blend of English, Scottish, and African tongues that formed in McIntosh's Black community due to their isolation. I've never read anywhere else about the language having Scottish roots. In doing so, she disregards the rich, unique ways of life of the Geechee people in coastal Georgia. The Geechee live in Georgia and Florida, the Gullah in the Carolinas. Gullah Geechee isn't just a language, it's an entire culture that also includes arts, crafts, food, spirituality, and music. Green proffers the Gullah language as a symbol of lack, instead of the asset more and more people are realizing it to be. Today, even the National Park Service is invested in preserving this culture, designating the land along the coast from Jacksonville, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida as a National Heritage Area. And Gullah Geechee are being featured more often in the mainstream media. So much for Green's unworldly label. Green assumes the African Americans of McIntosh lack culture. She assumes McIntosh remained segregated until the 1970s, more than a decade after Brown versus Board of Education, because white people wanted it that way. She assumed Black people in McIntosh wanted integration. But I remember riding in the car with Mama when I was 10 and her saying, I went to a segregated school and they should have kept things that way. We were happier back then. She would get angry at me for having so many white friends. When I first wanted to go on a date with a Chinese boy, Steven, the summer before 10th grade, she got frustrated. Steven was in the grade above me, and we didn't share any classes, so I didn't know him well in real life. I don't even remember how I became friends with him on MSN Messenger, but before I knew it, I was chatting with him late into the night. He would tell me how fine he thought I was, and when I flipped my yearbook to his picture, I liked what I saw. A cutie with spiky hair and a gold chain, a JV football player with a brain, enrolled in advanced classes. I loved being the center of his attention. He kept asking to take me out, but I was scared to ask my mom. I had never gone on a date with a boy alone. When I went to the homecoming dance and to the movies with a date, friends had always accompanied us. Plus, although Mama knew I'd had boyfriends before, they had all been Black. One Saturday summer afternoon, I worked up the nerve to ask Mama if the boy could pick me up for us to go to Chick-fil-A. Butterflies cocooned in my stomach as I took a deep breath and walked to her bedroom, where she was watching TV from bed. Can I go to Chick-fil-A with a boy from school? His name is Steven, and he has a car so he can pick me up. Aaron can come too, so we won't be alone. Erin, a white girl, had been one of my best friends since sixth grade. Mama sat up with a stern look in her eyes. I don't know this guy. I don't know his parents. Why should I let you go with him? Is he even Black? I think she suspected Stephen might be white since Aaron was. No, he's Chinese. I'm not letting you go out with some Chinese boy who I don't know. Damn it, why don't you have any Black friends? She yelled before slamming her bedroom door. She reacted like I thought she would. Before the end of the summer, she consented to me going out with Steven as long as friends came with us. She still wished I had more Black friends and would have probably been more accepting of Steven if he were Black. She perceived anyone who wasn't Black as a potential enemy. I thought Mama was old-fashioned and a tad ignorant, but as an adult, I'm better able to place myself in her shoes. She was in fifth grade when the white kids invaded the all-Black school she knew and loved, and they didn't come in peace. She must have felt like I do when white people intrude into all-Black movement building spaces, like something sacred has been breached. On Ancestry.com, I discovered a yearbook photo of Mama taken shortly after the integration of McIntosh schools. She wears a plaid collared shirt, hoop earrings, ear-length relaxed hair parted down the middle, and a hesitant smile. She looks like she doesn't know how to be happy in the middle of racial turmoil. To Green, integration signaled promise, but for Mama, it marked the end of life as she knew it. Shortly after that photo was taken, Mama went to live in New York City with her mother, who moved there in the 1960s, because she couldn't find work in McIntosh except for heading shrimps at the docks, working as a short order cook, and working in white people's homes. Up north, Grandma found work as a certified nursing assistant at a hospital, She didn't have time to wait around for McIntosh to change because she had a family to feed. Black people in McIntosh were self-sufficient, fishing, farming, and hunting for their families and their livelihoods until they couldn't be anymore thanks to capitalism, industrialization, and speculative development. Green often references how white residents called Black residents, who comprise most of the county, the sleeping giant. I don't think Black folks in McIntosh opted out of the civil rights movement because they were sleepy and simple. I think they were being worked to the bone by white people for poverty wages, taking care of their families and going to church instead. In the second part of Green's book, the author writes about the police shooting of a Black man named Ed Finch in March 1972 as the awakening that propels Thurnell Alston into running for the county commission. Darien's white police chief, Guy Hutchinson, saw and heard Finch and his girlfriend fussing with each other at her place across from the city jail. When Finch refused to quiet down at Hutchinson's request, the Archie Bunker lookalike shot a .38 caliber revolver into Finch's mouth, then stuck him in the jailhouse without medical attention as blood spewed out of his mouth. The incident was too egregious to ignore for the Black people of McIntosh, who appointed Alston as their de facto leader. Dressed in their Sunday's best, 300 Black residents from all over McIntosh descended upon Darien City Hall armed with guns and a list of demands, including for Finch to receive immediate medical care and for the police chief to be suspended. When city officials acquiesced to their demands, the Black community marinated in the taste of collective power. A series of organizing meetings hybridized with revivals ensued in the county's Black churches. Green presents the Three Musketeers, Alston and two other Black men, Nathaniel Grosvenor, a minister and educator, and Sammy Pinckney, a retired New York City cop, as the ringleaders of change. The three established the McIntosh County Civic Improvement Organization, a local NAACP chapter, and work with the Georgia Legal Services Program to file lawsuits against McIntosh and the city of Darien, winning more Black representation on the grand jury that selected the Board of Education and increased Black voting power through redistricting. After years of running, Alston is finally elected to the county commission in 1978. Black men had served in the position before him, but they'd been handpicked by Popple to be figureheads, not to actually represent the Black community's interest. Alston's commissioner position eventually wears him down and renders him disillusioned. He feels as if he's carrying the entire Black community's burdens without their support. The book ends with the death of Popple in 1979 and Alston being sentenced to 78 months in prison for making a cocaine deal with an undercover Georgia Bureau of Investigation agent in 1987. Finch, whose shooting by the police chief started the uprising, was charged with aggravated assault and obstructing an officer immediately upon being released from the hospital. He was indicted on both counts by an all-white jury, served 6 months in jail before being paroled, and was shot to death in Texas in 1976. The book doesn't say who killed him. Hutchinson got his police chief job back less than a month after shooting Finch. The state of civil rights in McIntosh today does not exactly inspire. Driving through the county in recent years, it looks the exact same as it did during my childhood. The 2020 U.S. Census Bureau indicates that it's no longer majority Black. On their county commission, there is one Black person out of 5 members. Many residents have forgotten about Alston and Green's book. The people who Green interviewed have mostly passed. The good old boy system the author claims died with Popple is still in full effect in coastal Georgia, as evidenced by the February 2020 murder of a 25-year-old Black man named Ahmaud Arbery in Brunswick by 3 white men, including one of my former classmates, Travis McMichael. Arbery, a former high school athlete with family roots in McIntosh, was simply jogging through a neighborhood when the men cornered, shot, and killed him. The district attorney, a white woman named Jackie Johnson, didn't arrest the three men until 3 months later when a video of the killing went viral, likely because of her relationship with Travis's father, Greg McMichael, who had been a former investigator in her office. Johnson perpetuated the good old boy system without even being a boy. A criminal case against Johnson for meddling with prosecution has been delayed since March 2023. The McMichaels and their accomplice, William Roddy Bryan, originally pleaded not guilty to all charges. The murder of Arbery has sparked a movement much like the one in Green's book, including the emergence of new racial justice organizations, a campaign to remove a Confederate monument from a public park that won in the successful passage of a state hate crime law. My heart aches for Arbery's family, who will never truly get justice because he can't be brought back to life. At least his family got more reparations than most. They wanted his murderers locked up for good, and that's what they got. After the Arbery family opposed the McMichaels plea deal to serve 30 years in federal prison in exchange for guilty pleas, the district judge rejected the agreement. In January 2022, the McMichaels were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Their accomplice Bryan got life in prison and won't be considered for parole for 30 years. The following month, the three men received federal charges for interference with rights, a hate crime, and attempted kidnapping, with the McMichaels receiving an additional charge for using a firearm during a violent crime. The power of the people led to this outcome, not the benevolence of the judicial legal system in coastal Georgia, which is still corrupt and white supremacist. How many more iterations of the same movement must we have before oppressive systems change for good? I believe feeding the prison industrial complex and calling for police reforms only begets more oppression. There is no way to reform an institution rooted in keeping African Americans enslaved and stealing their labor. Prisoners are no harbinger of justice. I would be lying, however, if I said the imprisonment of Arbery's murderers didn't feel a little like progress compared to what happened to Finch. Today, Green lives with her criminal defense attorney husband in Atlanta and has a boatload of children and grandchildren. She has published a total of 6 books, contributed to periodicals such as the New York Times and the Atlantic, and is the Kirk Distinguished Writer-in-Residence at Agnes Scott College. Praying for Sheetrock, her debut book, was a finalist for the National Book Award. When I asked myself whether Green had a right to tell this story, the answer is different every time. Praying for Sheetrock is undoubtedly well-written and contains a wealth of knowledge, but it also overlooks the important history of Black resistance in McIntosh. Currently, it's being turned into a future film, and I'm afraid that it too will omit this truth. If I could have my way, a Black person with ties to McIntosh would direct it. That's who I want to translate my ancestors' freedom struggles onto the screen. Otherwise, I'm not sure the movie will do right by them. Their story deserves to be told with the utmost care and respect. If I were the director, I would add the Darien insurrection of 1899 to Green's narrative. Imagine it. The date is August 21st. The sun is scorching and the air is muggy. A well-known local Black man is arrested upon being accused of rape by a white woman who just gave birth to a mixed-race baby. Henry Delegal is incarcerated, even though neither Black nor white residents believe the woman due to her poor reputation. The sheriff announces he wants to transport Delegal to Savannah for safekeeping, but Black townspeople know that means he will be lynched while en route. Their mission? To stop the man from being removed from the jail by the sheriff. Overnight, Delegal's sons mobilized 100 armed Black residents, some sources say hundreds, from throughout McIntosh to guard the Darien jail to ensure Delegal won't be lynched. For the next 2 days, each time the sheriff attempts to remove Delegal, this designated watchmen ring the bell of a nearby Black Baptist church for Black residents to assemble and defend the jail. The sheriff asked the governor to send in the state militia. On August 24th, the insurrectionists are arrested. When two white temporarily appointed deputies are dispatched on August 25th to the Delagel's home to arrest Henry's sons for inciting a riot, one of the deputies is shot and killed, and the other severely injured. The Delegel matriarch pleads with troops to protect her family from the sheriff and his posse, who are on their way. Miraculously, the troops convince the posse to stand down. The Savannah Press publishes this headline about the events on August 26th. Race war imminent, trouble not ended. The race war envisioned by white folks never ensues. The commander of the state militia meets with 10 prominent Black male leaders who publish a circular asking Black residents to refrain from inciting white violence. They direct the circular toward Black men, the heads of their households, asking every Black man to stand down and to see to it that no colored woman shall show her face at the courthouse or on the streets there too. Henry Delegel lives to see his day in court, where he is exonerated. Two of his sons are given a life sentence for shooting the deputies and killing one of them, while two of Delegel's other children are acquitted. 40 of the rioters' cases are dropped, and the other 23 are convicted and sentenced to perform hard labor and pay fines. In violation of convict release law, 2 women are sentenced to work on a sawmill. The outcome of the insurrection isn't exactly just, but it also isn't catastrophic as it could have been. Ultimately, the insurrection paid off. It prevented the lynching of an innocent Black man, proof that McIntosh's Black population knew how to fight white supremacy long before Green claims they did. Thank you. I'll put my mask back on. Any thoughts, or how did y'all feel? Had anyone read that chapter already? Amanda, I know Nadine did. Yeah. Any thoughts?
I was wondering, was it easy for you to find information about other examples of Black resistance? Like, I'm wondering why Green didn't include other examples prior to 1971.
Right. So Amanda's asking, was it easy? Okay, don't do that. Why would you? Okay. I want it to be right there and I
Thing rotating, or is it just?
I broke it. I'm not gonna buy it. Okay. Okay. All right. So Amanda was asking, was it easy for me to find information about Black resistance in McIntosh County? Google.
Mhm.
And granted, when Melissa Fay Green wrote this, was it 1991, 1992, around then? So there wasn't Google, so it wasn't quite as easy for her to find it. But she's a resourceful lady. She was working with legal services. She had access. And I refer to an article that I found that's kind of like calling out, like, hey, what about this? What about this? And I believe that was written around the same time that she wrote the book. And so it was there. It was in the books. But the thing is, maybe the people she was talking to in McIntosh County didn't know about it. That's fair to say, because there is such an erasure of Black history in schools everywhere, and certainly in South Georgia and coastal Georgia. So I suppose it wasn't readily available, but for her to like do all this research, write this book, I know the book was edited. Um, it's just strange. It's really strange that these other acts of resistance didn't make it. And so that's why I question, like, did she, maybe she knew about it, but she did not want to include it to serve her narrative. I'm not sure. It's really interesting to think about.
Mhm.
Yeah.
My question is, something like based on like what your narrative sort of was about the Black history in Southern Georgia, like how does omitting like Black resistance be that narrative? Because I'm also.
Sure. So, she's saying that when she was there in the 70s and getting this Black person elected to the county commission, because before there had been Black folks on the county commission, but they were kind of like handpicked by this white sheriff who like kind of controlled the town. He's like this legendary white sheriff, infamous white sheriff. And she's saying this is her book. The book is all about this is essentially the civil rights movement came to McIntosh County later than it came to other places. I feel like that's kind of like the thesis of the book. And so I think it might have been convenient for her to leave out like, wait, in the 1800s, there were all of these other like instances of or maybe, maybe she knew about these acts of resistance and maybe she thought that they weren't relevant in the 1970s, but I'm like, but I feel like they are relevant. It's like it's those people's ancestors, essentially, their grandparents, their parents, things like that. And so, I think she wanted a good book. She wanted a book. She wanted, she was like, this would make a good book. And so she told the story how she wanted to tell it from what she saw, from what she heard, which we know it wasn't the full story because she just like it says in the essay, like she's this, woman from Ohio. Like she came to McIntosh County to work with legal services. And I know I'm very critical of her in this chapter. Um, but I am grateful for the book. It's kind of wild I didn't hear about it until I went to college. I was like, what? Like there's a whole book about this place, like where my mom's from, where my grandma's from. It was really wild. So I think it's an important book. If I didn't, I wouldn't be critiquing it. Um, but yeah, and when I initially read it in college, I didn't know about. I just took it as like, okay, this is what it is. I didn't know about all those other acts of Black resistance until I decided to reread it during grad school when I was writing a lot of this book. And I was like, yeah, digging into the research and being like, wait, like, huh? And then I found the article that was entitled Stealing Sheetrock, and this guy is like saying, like, wait, like, why, like me and him were on the same page, like, why is all this stuff left out? And so um I wonder, did she know about it and just leave it out because she wanted she wanted it to be a particular narrative for the book. I don't know. Yeah. Thank you for your question.
I was wondering if you did go back to class and say, I have this connection and how that was for you, and then what it's been like, learning more and uncovering all the layers through grad school and writing this.
Yeah, I remember when I first read it, I did end up telling like the teacher, like, oh, I'm from there. Um, and I remember telling him about this story because we had to like write, it was a Georgia history class and we had to write different reflections. And I think this is in the book in the curse, the chapter called the curse. I told him about this. I was in McIntosh County during college and I was going to some wedding and like this old white guy, um, like I was lost. I don't know what was going, did we have GPS back then? Yeah, I don't know, but I was lost and I pulled over and I accidentally cut this guy off and he comes over, this old white guy, and he's like, hey, you better be glad that I'm a Christian or da da da. Like he basically threatened me. And it was around the time that I was in this history class and I was telling my teacher about it because I was just like, I don't know. I guess I was just trying to kind of tell him like what my experience with McIntosh County is. Um, but yeah, it's been, and then yeah, rereading it in grad school, which was recently. I was in grad school from like 2019 to 2022. Um, all the things I learned about home blew my mind and makes me really sad that we did not learn about it in school. All of these things, like all the things you'll read about in my book, are literally things that happened in my own backyard, places I went all the time. And it makes me think so much about, I feel like we didn't talk about it as much back then, but now we talk a lot about banned books. We talk about, critical race theory not being allowed into the classroom. And I think we didn't talk about it back then, but I think that same thing was going on when I was like in K through 12. Like we didn't learn all of the important Black history, Gullah Geechee history that was in our own backyard. And I feel like that's so intentional. And I feel like it's just sad. And I think, yeah, I just keep thinking about how things could have been different for me. Like I talk about a lot in the book about, feeling like an outsider, lacking self-esteem and confidence and things like that. And I think knowing your history, like and knowing my history would have made things easier. Yeah. Yeah.
I haven't had the opportunity to read all. I have enjoyed the essays that I've had a chance to read. And I was curious, based off of some of the essays that I've come across, have you been able to find any African Americans from the Gullah Geechee culture who write about the history of Gullah that you are inspired by? Because the
Yeah.
essays that I've read, it was kind of like, kind of outsiders coming into the community.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great question. So the question is, during the course of like writing the book, have I found Gullah Geechee authors who write about the culture? Not a lot. And that might just be it could just be on me, but I feel like there's not a ton. I talk about, there's a chapter in the book that's um, kind of like dedicated to a woman named Cornelia Walker Bailey. She has passed now, but she was the griot, the storyteller, kind of the community ambassador in Sapelo Island, which is in coastal Georgia, one of the last intact Gullah Geechee communities. And she published a memoir in 2000 about her life growing up in Sapelo. And that's such an important book that everyone should read. I also spent time with the Rayfords, Matthew Rayford and Tia Rayford in Brunswick, Georgia. And they are both chefs and farmers. Um, and the farm, Gilliard Farms, is this farm that has been in Matthew's family for hundreds of years. And they're practicing the same kind of farming that their ancestors did. And he has a cookbook called Breast and Yam, and that tells a little bit of his family story, also shares family recipes. And I have a chapter in the book all about my experience at his farm. So those are two that come to mind. And I feel like there's a lot more to come. But I feel like there are so many people here, like there's so many people who have not necessarily thought of themselves as Gullah Geechee before, who are kind of reclaiming that ancestry. In that culture. So I feel like there's going to be a lot more in the pipeline, hopefully.
Because I remember when I was reading that chapter about Cornelia, that you were mentioning how I forget the that wrote about Sappho, how he kind of like he kind of owned the stories versus giving an opportunity with like his privilege to invite the storytellers. And I was wondering, have you been inspired to maybe like have workshops about storytelling in that area in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. And have actually been in conversation with folks. We were supposed to do one for young people that didn't turn out, but absolutely. I just want to see more resources, more support going towards Gullah Geechee people to tell our own stories. That would be awesome. Yeah. Hey.
I really love the way that you're writing it, like, it's so intimate, but your work as a journalist, like, really comes through. I mean, I think
Thank
the
you.
piece you read really exemplifies that.
Thank you.
And I would just love to hear a little bit about how you approach writing, and how you so beautifully and seamlessly blend the intimate details of your own life into like what feels very much like powerful movement journalism.
Yeah, yeah. Shout out to movement journalism. So the question is, how do I approach my writing? Like kind of merging more personal, intimate things with more journalistic things. And um it was a rough road getting there. I learned a lot in graduate school. So when I came to graduate school, I had been a journalist for like 10 years, but I did not have a lot of experience with creative writing. And so I was a lot of things were very, very new to me. Like I had never been in a writing workshop, and that's kind of like one of the major things you do in a Master of Fine Arts and Creative Writing program. You submit pieces and your professors and your classmates critique the writing. Um, and at first, it was painful because my, I just really didn't know how to. I came into grad school and I thought that I didn't have to be so personal. I was doing creative nonfiction and I was like, okay, so I can do it kind of like narrative nonfiction and I don't have to be like in it. I can just kind of be like the observer. But that way of writing, it just did not resonate at all with my classmates or the professors. And I had to change that. I had to change that because and I had to learn that like the personal, the intimate, all of those things, it's what makes it creative and what makes it artistic. And so um it was just like trial and error, listening to a lot of feedback, taking in a lot of feedback. Um I encourage people to be a part. If you don't do a grad school program, which you don't have to write a book, uh, please don't if you don't have to. But like being a part of a writing community where you can get feedback and critique is so important because people will see things that you don't. And I always think about what one of my professors told me that, in a good essay, you should be balancing showing, telling, and reflecting. And that's what I always try to think about in my essays. Like, am I creating a good balance of that? Yeah. Thank you. Hey, Liz.
Hello again.
Yeah.
So,
Yay, y'all brought questions. Yay.
I have quite a few. Uh, one of the questions that I had is based off of the chapter that you just read. Have you been in Atlanta with so many wonderful, brilliant artists? Have you considered approaching anybody about creating maybe a short film?
That would be so dope.
You broke the scene.
And I can think of a few people I could probably approach. Don't be putting things into my mind. That is something else. Oh my gosh. That could be really cool. That could be really cool. I want to do that now. I didn't repeat the question, but the question was, have I thought about approaching, other creative people in Atlanta about doing a short film, maybe based on the chapter I just read, or maybe even something else in the book. And that would be a really awesome idea. Let's put a pin in it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. If you keep bothering me about it, it'll eventually happen.
Wondering, now that you have released such a wonderful book, have you been dreaming about a new writing adventure, you're like, hold on, let's slow down.
Like a new book?
Yes,
Yeah.
a little bit about.
So there are kind of two that are I won't really say they're in the works, but I had one press who read a story that I wrote about this lesbian feminist press in the 1970s that was in Atlanta. And I wrote a story about it. And I was approached by a press and they were like, would you be interested in writing a book for us about, kind of around these themes? And so what I came up with was a book proposal that kind of like chronicled what queer and trans organizing in Atlanta has looked like over the years. That's kind of on pause right now, but that's one idea. And then another one, kind of like what I've done with this book, but looking at my paternal side, which is rooted in Eastern North Carolina, in Bertie County, North Carolina, to be specific. I'm really, because I grew up in coastal Georgia, I did not spend a lot of time with my dad's side of the family. So I'm very, very curious about the history there. And where my dad and my grandma live, they live on this land where there's a old schoolhouse that used to be the schoolhouse for Black children in the community. It's there. It's been there forever, and I don't really know anything about it. And when I Google it, I can't really find much about it, except it was called the Village Hideaway School. And so I want to like do research on that school and the community and just see if I can kind of like um do something maybe similar. I don't know. I don't really know what it will turn out to be, but I just really want to go down some rabbit holes with like Black history and culture in Eastern North Carolina. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Hi.
Really, somebody asked a question about kind of really people, but for example, are you seeing something where, history is erased and people haven't very
Yeah.
what does that process? What
Yeah. Yeah, I really simplified it, didn't I? I'm like, Google. Probably talking to people, and just interviewing people one-on-one. Like I just brought up the thing about Eastern North Carolina, and I've been meaning to interview my grandmother who's like 92 for the longest, because I mean I need to interview her because she's 92 and she will know a lot. So talking to people, interviewing them, um, is a great way to find things, I feel like. And I've just been like encouraging people like just to talk to your elders in your community and your family, because I feel like that's how stories get erased. And a lot of things get passed down orally, and it's so important to get it recorded and written down. And so I feel like that's been um another like research method that's really important. And I also did some like research at the Brunswick Library, going through old newspapers, uh, like really digging into those. Also getting them to send me, they were really great about like sending me different articles and stuff. And so, yeah, those are some other ways I can think of. Thank you. Yeah,
Oh, I love the chapter about you going to visit your dad for like the summer. I feel like that in itself could be a movie. That was a
yeah.
wild time, it seemed like. And I also just wanted to ask, have any of your family members read the book or reached out to you about the book? I'm
Yeah.
just curious, and you don't have to answer that because I know that's like personal.
Yeah, so the question is, have any of my family members read the book? And a lot of them probably have at this point. A lot of my immediate family came to my book launch in Atlanta. And they were like right in the front row, kind of nerve-wracking. Yeah, a lot of them have read it. Like my mom is taking it a lot better than I thought she would. Of course, she doesn't like love some of the depictions of her, but also she's like, well, freedom of speech, like anyone can write what they want to write. I'm like, That's true. That's true. And so that was one of my like biggest fears putting this out. I'm just like, my family is going to disown me. Okay. But they haven't yet. I've been invited to be a part of Secret Santa, and like they're taking it a lot better than I thought they would. I think, a lot of them are even proud of me. And so and in my acknowledgments, I try to like kind of explain like why I did it. But it's been it was like one of the hardest parts because I'm just like, what is my family going to think? I didn't try to, because I just don't want any of them to think that I tried to make them like the villain or anything. Because I didn't. I was just kind of like, these are my experiences. But I tried to like make sure I wanted them to be like nuanced characters, like, and I didn't want to paint them as all bad or anything like that. It's just like complicated relationships, and I feel like I was not conditioned to like be putting my personal business out there like that. But I feel like we have like I just think it's important to do because I've had so many people tell me that they can empathize and relate with the stories, and I think that's important. Go with it, yeah.
Here you say you grew up in Brunswick, and you said feeling alienated as a Black girl to say we were in a racial and political environment.
Hmm.
The reason why I just read that whole thing
Yeah.
is I'm going to show the backstory is still with the question I'm going to ask.
Okay.
So I grew up in New York City, Manhattan. I've been here for over 16 years.
Oh, wow.
Down here in Boston.
Okay.
So even though I grew up in New York City, even though we had a welcoming LGBTQ community, I never ever felt welcome because in New York City, like I tell some people, everybody has different experiences. My family's been here for generations, born and raised, but for some reason, it was like when I went to the LGBT community, they had like an area where it was like Black gays, and then we went to the area whenever I dated folks and I was in interracial relationships. It was always like from my own group, what I got was you wasn't queer looking enough or gay enough.
Hmm.
To really be considered one of us.
Right.
But then when I found out with other folks, it was always like, oh, I see you Black, but I don't see you being that Black enough, so I don't really understand. Then I was like, but I look like it when I hear what you told me.
Yeah.
So then it was saying something about my mannerism and how I act. And then I said, well, ask me a little bit how I was raised in my background. So with that being said, I have to say all that backstory.
Yeah.
How would your book apply for those folks that also identifies that, but they might not have what people would seem as like if somebody was with somebody and somebody was there, because not everybody has a deal. Not everybody, like there's people. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a deep thinker.
No. I'm just like, thank you for sharing your story. And I feel like I can definitely relate to that. And so the question is like, how does the book apply to, can you?
Okay, how would the book apply to folks that wouldn't normally fit into what somebody would consider as an LGBT? Like they feeling it outside of not only within LGBT, also within the heterosexual world. Because I could blend in with that.
Yeah.
When I'm dating someone, I share this with them.
Okay. Right. So yeah, how does it apply to like LGBTQ people who don't necessarily feel like an outsider even in LGBTQ spaces. Ooh. Yeah, I'm thinking about how I was like Brunswick as a city is majority Black, but I still had times where I felt like an outsider. So I'm thinking about that as like kind of similar.
But I came to Asheville 16 years ago, and I don't feel like outsiders for where I stayed.
Right.
Because to me, when I came to Asheville, it was like what you brought to the table.
Uh-huh.
Then people see me as me, not necessarily. They see me as a person that happens to be African American,
Right.
not like an African American girl.
Yeah,
So that's why I say after, that's my experiences, but then after it's always been.
right, yeah, like I'm thinking about, yeah, being Black, and even when I was around Black people in Brunswick, feeling different, but for me, why I felt different was because I am neurodivergent, and I did not know that back then. I am autistic, but I did not know that back then. And so, I feel like other Black people might have seen me as different because I might have been talking differently or moving differently or acting differently. And that was because I was different, and because I was neurodivergent. And so I think that it's interesting to think about, even when you're like with your own people, you might not have that sense of belonging. So I think it, I think, I think that that's just what your question has me thinking about, about,
Astro. And like when I went to UNCA, it was very interesting how it was like we were ordinary diversion, like a lot of us was because I was like Asperger's, and somebody said,
Mhm.
hey, I have ADHD. I was
Yeah.
like, well, mom was Asperger's, but with the scapular. So it was different things that people so we was talking about our aha moments
yeah,
and how it got a whole lot better when we turned in our 40s. Like we struggled a lot when we was in our 20s.
yeah,
30s was like, haha. And then 40s, it was like, okay, I think I got the hang of how to manage it. When I
right,
have a sensory overload, I would just say to a friend, hey, I just need a book.
yeah, nice, yeah. Um, Thank you. Thank you for your question.
I have, a question, my question is, if somebody was to start a book tour, what advice would you give?
If someone was to start a embark on a book tour, what advice would I give them? Get a lot of rest. Keep a calendar, to keep, because there's just so many dates and locations. So just keeping that straight is a lot. Hopefully, you might be self-published, so you might not have a press, but at your press, hopefully there's a publicist or a marketing assistant, that can help you. So just making sure to be in communication with them, and let people know, that you're like open to like coming to their cities and things. Cause I just feel like so many of like the friendships and relationships that I have been helpful during this tour and have helped me like set up different events because of these different connections. So don't be afraid to like use your connections to put on events. I think that's super important. Yeah.
And a follow-up question.
Yes.
So what was the process for you to get your book published?
Yeah. So what was the process to get my book published? It happened like a lot more quickly than I thought it would. So the book, it evolved from my thesis, my MFA thesis, and it was December 2021. I was having a meeting with an editor at Scallywag magazine, which is a magazine that covers social justice issues in the South. And I was talking to her about an article I wanted to publish in Scallywag, and I started talking to her about my thesis. And she was like, well, I'm actually an editor at Hub City Press, and we might be interested in publishing that. And the rest was history. So even before I graduated um, from my MFA program, I had already signed a book contract. And so, yeah, I kept it secret though. I was like, not until after I graduated, because I didn't want it to sound like I was bragging, like, oh, look at me, I got, whatever. Yeah. I just like kept it to myself. But that's why I went back to my grad school recently and did a reading and talked to the students, and I told them like, I know y'all are busy, but when you're in grad school, try to be writing still, try to be publishing still, because you don't ever know who you're going to meet who could, yeah, present opportunities to you like that. So yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. These were good questions, y'all. I feel like Y'all had the most questions of like every event. So yeah, so far. Asheville is inquisitive.
You completed your grad school education?
I did, yeah. Master of Fine Arts and Creative Writing. Yeah. Yeah, so there's like 10 years after I graduated from undergrad. And I was like one of the older people in the program. It was like me and like there were people in their early 20s, mid-20s, and I was in like my mid-30s. So I felt like the auntie of the program. And I was fine with that. I took that position, you know. It's never too late.
Neesha, thank you so much for being here today and sharing, and doing so much reading for us.
Thank
I
you.
want to make sure everybody knows that there are copies of Come By Here over by the register if you don't already have one, and I did hear a willingness to sign.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Awesome, and thanks to everybody that joined virtually. I saw a bunch of people logged in.
What? Hey.